Good morning. This is Sunday morning. I sure am glad to be with you today. I hope today is a good day for you, and we're looking forward to a good time in the house of God today. You know, every day ought to be a day of excitement when we get to go to church. And church has been a part of my life all my life, and never been a time when we were not in church. I had to work sometimes when I was in college and not able to attend while I was at work. But it has always been a part of our life, our regular activities centered around the church. And I love church, I love everything about it. Some of the funniest things in our life happened at church. Some of the most serious things in our life happened at church. And I really love to be in church. My dad, several years ago, when he was an evangelist, he wrote an article entitled "It Happened at the Altar," and he told stories of people who made decisions and things that happened in the services. And it was wonderful, and that's exactly the way it is. Things happen at church, and I don't want to be like Thomas, who missed the first meeting of the resurrected Christ with the disciples. I want to be there when things happen. Well, today we're going to be talking about building our friendships around the church. And so I hope that you'll stay with us as we do that, because it's important where we find our friends and the kind of friends we find. And we'll talk about that just a little bit. I heard about a Sunday school teacher who was teaching her class about Jonah, and she read the story of Jonah and all about how the Lord prepared the great fish to swallow him, how Jonah prayed and he said, "In my distress, the Lord heard me," and all of that. He goes through all that, but praying that he would do what God wanted him to do now, and so forth. And then the teacher told him, and the Lord, after Jonah prayed, the Lord uh, told the fish to go vomit him out, and the fish vomited Jonah out on the shore. And then he went and did what he was supposed to do. And the teacher looked at her young class, and she said, "Now, boys and girls, let me ask you a question. What do you think this story teaches us?" One little boy had a look on his face where he was thinking hard, and he said, "I know." And the teacher said, "What is it?" And he said, "You can't keep a good man down." Well, I don't know that that was the lesson, but that is a lesson. Today, our text is found in Acts chapter 2, and we're talking about building friendships around the church. And this text is the very beginning of the church on the day of Pentecost. And the Bible says this, beginning in verse number 42. "And they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship, and in breaking of bread and in prayers. And fear came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were done by the apostles. And all that believed were together and had all things common, and sold their possessions and goods, and parted them to all men as every man had need. And they, continuing daily with one accord in the temple, and breaking bread from house to house, did eat their meat with gladness and singleness of heart, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to the church daily such as should be saved." The Bible says in Proverbs 13:20, "He that worketh with wise men shall be wise." But then he says, "But the companion of fools will be a fool." By our associations, we take on the characteristics of others. You know, that's true in everything, isn't it? When I was a young man just starting out preaching, and one of my favorite preachers of all time was Dr. Curtis Hudson. Dr. Curtis Hudson came out of Georgia, not too far from the Atlanta area, and he was a real country, and I mean hick preacher, if you will. He had the sound of that area of Georgia, and I mean he sounded as country as anybody you ever heard. And I love to hear him preach as he matured, not only in his life but also in his positions. He lost a little bit of that edge, but it was always in there, and you could always tell it. He was a country boy at heart. But I would listen to him, and I listened to him a lot. I had some of his sermons practically memorized, building and battling. That was one of my favorites, and some others that he did. And I listened to him all the time. I finally had to quit listening to him because I began to talk just like him. Why? Because I began to imitate the person that I really liked. Isn't that interesting? And we do that, by the way. You take on characteristics of somebody that you like. If you hang around them a lot, if you stay with them a lot, you're going to begin to take on their mannerisms, what they say, how they do things. A lot of pastors are now in the ministry, and they are habitually doing some things, their personalities and so forth are imitations of the person who influenced them the most. And you can look at them and say, oh, I know who that guy was with. I know where you've been. Well, when the Bible says, he that worketh with wise men, he walketh with wise men, shall be wise, that's what it means. You're going to take on those trappings. By our associations, we take on those characteristics. In Acts chapter 2, what we find is these brand new converts wanted to do right. They wanted to be what they should be. And so they stayed around the apostles. And as the Bible says, they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship. They wanted to be with them. They wanted to go forth. Both groups centered their fellowship around this brand new body, the church. You see, the church should not just be a place we go, but it should be a very integral part of our lives. Our fellowship, our friendship should center around the activities of the church. Several years ago, I was pastoring, and we had a family that came to our church. They came from another denomination. The church they came from was a very well-established church. And the church that they came from was a church that their family had helped to start. The older generation had helped to start it. And they came to us when they began to come to our church. I'll never forget one day I was talking with them, and I had the privilege of baptizing that entire family. Man, what a blessing that was. Some of them were saved before they got to us. I baptized them because they came from a denomination that did not baptize. And then we were able to see some of their children saved, and I baptized their children. But nonetheless, they came to us. They had been with our church just a short time, not a long time. And the man, the man said to us, we were talking one day, and he said, the reason why we came to the church was because at our church, it was just church. We'd show up on Sunday morning, and that was it. We went to church, we went home. He said, but we came to your church, and he said, when we got here, he said, it's a way of life. And that's the way the church ought to be. It ought to be a way of life for us. It is our life, if you will. In April of 2000, nearly 26 years ago now, our church, Providence Baptist Church, had its first services. Our first two Sundays, we met in a garage, and then we were able to begin meeting in Chapel Acres. Jimmy Chapel owned that. She was a special lady to us, a great help to us in those days. And so she called it Chapel Acres after her name. Well, as we began, we wanted a motto for our church. Churches have mottos, like the church that makes a difference, the church of the green light. The some of them have something like the church that's worth the drive, and things like that. Every church has its own slogan. Some churches have one at making much of Jesus. Well, whatever yours is, it's okay. But we wanted something unique for us as a church. And I'll never forget those early families. Those of us got together, just a handful, by the way, and we came up with this motto: making friends, praising God, changing lives. And that has been our theme for all these years. When the first church was formed on the day of Pentecost, we can see those elements involved in what is told us about them in the last few verses. They were known for their fellowship. They were praising God, and all because their lives had been changed. That is church, and that's what it ought to be. I read this about our topic for today. If the local church is going to develop the kind of beauty that God says is possible, that which will attract others to Christ, we must commit to becoming together. The kind of church Christ calls us to be. A church that is a biblical fellowship. The only kind of fellowship many know in church is after a service where men stand around and ask each other superficial questions. Then they find their wives who are having similar conversations and go home. But biblical fellowship has the power to revolutionize lives. Masks come off, conversations get deep, hearts get vulnerable, lives are shared, accountability is invited, and tenderness flows. People really do become more like brothers and sisters. They shoulder each other's burdens. And unfortunately, that was something that few of the people today experience growing up in church in America. Isn't that sad? What a statement. So what we think about is this: if that is the way it is that what God intended? No, I don't believe so. In the old church covenant that every church used to publish and every church had, it is in our Constitution. One of the things it says is this: we will tenderly watch out one for another. We ought to be looking out for each other, trying to be a help to a blessing. If I see somebody that looks like they're carrying a burden, I need to speak to them, encourage them, help them. I need to put my arm on their shoulder and say, is there something I can do for you? I'm praying for you. I want to be a blessing. Let me help you. There ought to be those that tend that way. In our text, we find some interesting phrases that do not necessarily reflect what is in the average church today. Notice these phrases, would you? It says they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship. They continued in what the apostles taught and in fellowship. The Bible says in that same passage, all that believed were together. They had singleness of heart. And then it says finally, praising God. That is what church should be about. Continuing in the doctrine, growing in the teaching and the fellowship of the church. And then that unified singleness of heart, gathering together, and in that setting, praising God for what he has done. That ought to be the picture of every local Bible-believing church. You see, the church is not where we go, but rather it is who we are. In days gone by, church was looked forward to, but in many cases today it is endured. As we make our friends and our fellowship centered around the church, it will become more precious and more important for our own growth and service for Christ. When I was a boy growing up, I can remember almost all of my friends were at church. It wasn't because we had a Christian school at our church, because from the time I was in the 5th grade up, we did not have a Christian school. But we did have an active church. And my friends and I would get together when we were children. We would play outside of the church after church was over. We would run around, and I can remember kids walking out of the church house, going out to play, and the parents would say, "Don't get your clothes dirty." We played out there. When we became teenagers, it was where we hung out together. We wanted to do things together as a group, and we got together. That was our friendships. Families got together. Families met with other families. It was looked forward to. I wanted to go to church. My friends were there. People I loved were there. I wanted to go. And that's the way it ought to be. I want to get to church to see the people that we love. And when we look at this early church, they are a pattern for us. As we make our friends and our fellowship centers around the church, it will become more and more important for our own growth and service for Christ. It will literally become precious to us at the church. Our friendships, our fellowship ought to be centered around that body and building that body. Somebody said this, and I like it. Salvation is but the first step in the divine life. As long as we live, we should more and more be turning from all that is evil and turning to all that is good. God bless you for listening today. Hope you'll join with us in the morning, 8:30, right here. God bless you today is my